We all realize that music has a rhythm. It has a certain pattern to it, and that is what makes it um, enjoyable to listen to. This certain rhythm, this certain pattern, whether it be rock music or classical. I don't like jazz music because I don't see that much rhythm in it, but some people do. All right, but that's what draws us to it is this certain pattern that we call a rhythm in music. But do you know life has a rhythm? Nature has a rhythm. The way that birds fly, the way that fish swim, the way that a horse runs, all has a rhythm. If you look at the birds singing in the morning, the squirrels running around in the trees, they have a rhythm, they have a pattern about them. The waves crashing on the beach at the ocean, there's a pattern, there's a certain rhythm. There's a rhythm to the wind blowing and the snow falling and the rain falling and the sun shining. We live in a realm of patterns and rhythms. The earth turns and there's day and night. There's sun and light and darkness. So nature is set up this way. And our lives are set up this way. We have a rhythm to our life. We have a mental rhythm, a physical rhythm, and a spiritual rhythm. Now, this is different than routine. Rhythm and routine are two separate items. You do things on a daily basis that's a routine that fits into a rhythm of life, but your rhythm, your pattern is distinctly different. You can fall out of a pattern of life and still have somewhat of a routine, you know, but your rhythm is how you do things. It's the pattern in which we live. If we fall out of this rhythm mentally, what are the consequences of falling out of a mental rhythm? We call it insanity. Okay? If we fall out of a physical rhythm, we call it poor health. Diabetes, cancer, heart disease. These are all patterns of falling out of a physical rhythm. Okay? We can fall out of a spiritual rhythm. A pattern that is set, that God has set for us, and we have followed it, and we are set in this pattern. Again, it's different than a routine. Okay, a routine is something we do subconsciously. It's things that sometimes have to be done. Rhythms and patterns are things we choose to do, and that we have to do, and that it makes things work in our lives. Without the rhythms of our life, the patterns of our life, everything falls apart. It falls into pieces without that core rhythm. If you take music and take away the rhythm, you have several instruments that are not in sync with each other, it's a mess. Kind of like jazz music. But if you have all of the instruments and people singing all in the same pattern and the same beat and harmonizing, there's a rhythm there. You can follow it. It's inspiring. Our lives are no different. Our spiritual lives are no different. Falling out of a spiritual rhythm is, well, I can think of a couple examples in the Bible. The first king of Israel was Saul. He fell out of that spiritual rhythm and he failed. Okay? His kingship was a failure. He died a failure. Samson is another example I can think of in the Bible. Great man of God at one time, a mighty man, probably the strongest man that ever lived, fell out of a spiritual rhythm with God, died a failure. Okay, King David, I guess we could say that he at times fell out of spiritual rhythms with God, but he came back, he repented, Okay, he made it right with God, and therefore he was a success. And Jesus talked about David as being a success. He was repentant. He was a human being. Okay, we fall out of rhythms. We fall out of our patterns with God. But it's important not to. And the consequences are dire if we do. In the book of Matthew, chapter 21 and verse 19, Jesus comes across a fig tree that isn't bearing any fruit. And he curses it, and it died. In verse 19, I'll read, "And when he saw," he being Jesus, "a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon but leaves only." He only found leaves. "And said unto it, Let no fruit grow on it, on thee henceforth forever. And presently the fig tree withered away." This is what happens to us. We will wither away if we are not in tune with God. We are meant to have a spiritual relationship with Christ. We are meant to serve Him. We are designed by His hand, His creation. We are to serve Him. We are to have a rhythm and a pattern in life, to follow Him. The Holy Spirit is our guide in life. He guides us through the darkest corners of this realm, and we are to follow Him. And our rhythm is like music when we follow God. When we don't follow God, it becomes a chaotic mess. In Galatians 6 and 7 reads, "Be not deceived. God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap." Verse 8, "For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." Life everlasting in Jesus Christ. His Spirit comes into us. We ask forgiveness when we fall out of rhythm. The problem is many people stay out of rhythm, and they do not ask for forgiveness, and they die in their sin and they go to hell because they've rejected Christ and the grace that God has offered. We have to accept the grace of God and sow not to the flesh. When we're starting to sow to the flesh, when we start living in the flesh, living our own lives, fulfilling our desires, we fall out of rhythm with God. Our music sucks to God. We do not sound good. We sound like crap when we fall out of rhythm with God. If we want to sound good to God, if we want to have God look down on us and be pleased, we keep the rhythm flowing just so that it sounds like a wonderful song in the ears of God.